All right, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the spread of the Industrial Revolution and technologies of the industrial age. And we're going to jump right into that technology and innovation theme. What you need to know is that development of new machines like the steam engine will lead to a revolution in the use of fossil fuels like coal and later in the Industrial Revolution, oil. The second revolution is going to lead to new methods in production of steel, chemicals, electricity, machinery, and we're going to see that in the latter 19th century. And then finally, railroads, steamships, and the telegraph are going to be developed during this industrial age that will make exploration, development, and communication possible with interior regions, leading to increased trade and migration of peoples. So let's start off with a closer look into the steam engine. This is originally developed in England in the 17th century, but then modified and expanded by other inventors as a device originally to pump water out of coal mines. But then obviously the uses for the steam engine are going to be used in many different areas, including locomotives and railroads, powering factories, and many other devices. The Industrial Revolution is going to spread, starting in that England with the textile industry in England and other industries that developed to other Western European states through the 19th century and even across the Atlantic Ocean. And as this industrial revolution and industrial production spreads, we're going to see the rise in Western Europe and the United States in terms of the global share of manufacturing. We've talked to this entire course of AP World about how East Asia and South Asia were really the dominant manufacturing centers of the world. And that's going to flip during this industrial era where we see Western Europe and the United States on the rise. The second revolution, as we've already said, these are those new developments in the production of steel through a process known as the Bessemer process, which will lead to stronger and more pure steel that can be used for things like skyscrapers. And this new production method of steel is going to allow steel railroad tracks to stretch across continents. It's going to lead to the development of electricity and the movement of electricity, the distribution of electricity, the advent of chemical developments and technologies, internal combustion engines, that's the automobiles that we drive around in, and more precision machinery. With regard to transportation and communication, the big three you need to know, railroads and steam locomotives, steamships, and the telegraph. Railroads are going to allow goods and people to move deeper inland, to connect to new markets and to reach new resources that couldn't otherwise have been reached. Steamships will do much the same thing, but just with rivers, allowing easier movement up and down rivers. Also faster movement across oceans to increase the connectivity between different parts of the world and to decrease the time it takes to ship goods back and forth. Each of these developments will lead in our next unit for us to talk about global imperialism of Western Europe. If you recall, we said Western Europe in the 1500s and into the 16 and 1700s could only create trading post empires along the coasts of Africa and South Asia and East Asia. But the development of these technological advances will allow those states to push deeper and deeper inland. And then the telegraph, sending an electrical signal through a copper wire over long distances to communicate. And this is going to increase the amount of communication and decrease the speed for communication over long distances. Now, that first industry that is industrialized in Western Europe and Britain is going to be the textile industry, the production of cloth. This is going to lead England to become the world's largest producer of cloth. And England is going to need vast supplies of cotton delivered from overseas producers to feed these textiles. This comes from colonial America, later the United States, the Indian subcontinent, and Egypt. what you need to know with regard to governance is states are going to be supporting their own industries through government action. And this is going to take form with the development of colonial empires to supply the raw materials that factories needed and markets in order to sell those goods. And we're even going to see nations like Japan that are going to move to modernize. In Japan, it's with what's known as the Meiji Restoration, where the government will support and encourage a development of an industrialized economy. Now, obviously, the Industrial Revolution needs a vast amount of raw materials that just aren't all found in England to survive, to produce, and that's going to be where nations are going to look to overseas colonies for that production. So England, with its textiles, needs a lot of cotton. That'll come from Egypt and India primarily, as Indians are pushed to produce cotton for export rather than for their own consumption or food for their own consumption. Millions of Indians will suffer from starvation following a famine in the 1870s. And this is largely because the British were pushing so much cotton production onto their colony of India. In Africa, rubber production in the Belgian Congo in the late 19th century will lead to a brutal and oppressive treatment of the Congolese people by the Belgians to produce. This will collapse the agricultural base in the Congo and lead to millions of Congolese dying during Belgian colonial rule. And you see above me here just horrible images of the punishments that Congolese would face if they didn't produce enough rubber on a day-to-day basis. Mining in Africa was also central to the needs for the Industrial Revolution. In Europe, coal and iron are certainly going to see increased demand and increased production. But with the second Industrial Revolution, need for more copper, for wiring, for electrical and telegraph wires was going to be needed. And also the mining of precious stones and gold out of the African subcontinent. Pardon me. And then finally, markets. These industrial factories are producing incredible amounts of goods, and companies want to sell that beyond their national borders. So industrial production is going to lead for a need for new markets overseas. And China is going to be the biggest prize on the map as it's got the biggest population. So what do you need to take out of these two sections? One, the move to industrialism is going to grow European and American manufacturing at the expense of East Asian and South Asian manufacturing. The factory system is going to contribute to increased work hours and production and greater profits, but it's also going to rely on a lot of overseas goods to maintain that production. So states will support that by supporting the acquisition of colonial empires for raw materials and markets. We'll talk to you next time.